Hello! It has been a week, less than a week because we did it on Tuesday, so, more making the rounds frequency in your 7-day period. Hooray. Exactly. Anyway, Emily was talking to me about feeling very insecure about wasting paper,
True.
and that's the most important thing that matters.
At least
Also,
I
I
didn't set
need.
the ocean on fire.
How do you set the ocean on fire?
I don't
I
know.
don't,
Ask
I don't think.
what is it? Ask BP. They're the ones that did it.
Oh yeah.
You
Okay.
don't remember
Now
that? Yeah.
we're getting deep into this. We're getting deep into
Yeah,
this
I know.
already. Okay. Environmental change, wasting paper, British Petroleum. Yes. So we're going to be talking about Vanguard, which is the kernel level anti-cheat and how it's slowly being rolled out from Valorant into League. It has been first deployed in the Philippines server, I believe.
Hmm.
And then it's
Yeah.
slowly going to kind of make its way around the globe. I don't remember the exact ETA of when it's supposed to hit like some of the major servers, but they're kind of quote unquote testing it. It's obviously already deployed fully in Valorant. Um, yes, for those of you who are not familiar with what a kernel level anti cheat is, there are several layers of uh, security and interfacing in your PC, and a kernel level one basically is where the hardware interacts with the software. So it's basically like
Hmm.
ground zero, uh, where like the very fundamental core of your PC, which means that you have like unprecedented access to everything within your computer. So that's all anything that you have on it. It also doesn't turn off ever. Because the idea is that if you install some kind of cheating software and then run the PC and that software gets masked because hackers are extremely elite, then it will still pick it up, right? That is the justification for it, at least.
Yeah. I
Um,
think the
yes. So
the biggest
yeah.
thing to establish with like Vanguard versus other kernel level anti-cheats is that it is on all the time. So
Mhm.
it starts up at like when you boot your PC instead of just when you load up the game, which is different because like a lot of other games have like kernel level anti-cheats. Off the top of my head, I remember when people were looking into it, uh like anything from like Apex Legends, I think has one. uh Genshin Impact, and I assume Honkai Star Rail, since that's the same like client type,
Mhm.
apparently does, which I thought was hilarious when I was like looking into this. But the big difference, it's like actually a lot of different things, but the big difference between those and Vanguard is that Vanguard will start at like boot essentially. So
Mhm.
like not only is it a kernel level anti-cheat, but it starts at the kernel level on boot. So like your bootloader starts, and then it starts at the same time as like the core of the computer starts, and the hardware starts interacting with your operating system.
Mhm.
And the idea is that obviously if you are installing a program or if you have a program, it will be able to detect it, and it has in that regard worked, as far as I know, pretty well in Valorant, to be honest. In terms of detecting uh cheaters within that game. And not only that, but the amount of access allows them to essentially immediately hardware ban that person's PC. And then uh, the game ends and everyone else does not lose LP or anything. Like it basically just a message will flash and it'll be like, cheater detected in your game. But if you are not the cheater, you're not affected outside of the game ending. Um, so that's, I mean, like in terms of actually detecting uh cheaters in Valorant, it has been really, really successful. The big thing I think that people are rightfully concerned about is again, just the level of access that it has, the fact that it's always running. And if you like turn it off in order to play Valorant, and now when it's introduced to League of Legends, you'll have to, if you turn it off, you'll have to reboot your entire computer in order to play the game, because it'll tell you that it's not, like, Vanguard's not on, ergo you can't play the game. And I will say, personally, I had some issues with it on Valorant. It was fine initially. It was fine on my gaming laptop, and then on the PC, it blue screened it a couple of times. And since I am pretty pathetically bad at FPS games, and also, so in particular, like tac shooters, because you don't just get to respawn and still try to kill people, I ended up just stopping playing it. At that point, I didn't have a lot of friends who still played it like super regularly anyway. So it wasn't like a huge loss, but obviously League of Legends would be, it would like actively affect my work. So that would be a massive issue if it is introduced and this is still happening.
Yeah. I guess there have been a lot of patches, a lot of optimizations allegedly run to kind of make it get rid of the immediate issue that you're talking about, which is like the blue screening or the software issues. The Riot is not like acknowledging that Vanguard actually does cause these problems. It is still releasing patches to improve Vanguard's performance with your system. So that was a little weird. But
yeah, I know, like, this isn't the only problem. Like, I remember talking to Clayton about it, and he said that on his PC, it just froze the client. So like, and this apparently was a problem that they had listed somewhere, I forget. But yeah, it just froze it, and like he couldn't play. So he's like, I'm done. Like Clayton's not gonna waste time with, he's just like, and so ends my potential Valorant career. No, I'm just kidding. But like, in all honesty, that was another like really common thing, is like the client itself would freeze and you wouldn't be able to interact with it.
I'm super looking forward to it being applied to the spaghetti code that is the existing League of Legends client that's being held up by popsicle sticks and Elmer's glue. It'll be fun. But yeah, I mean, luckily for me, I hate the stupid game. So kidding.
Oh my god.
Just watch us, basically TLDR, guys. Just watch as much professional League as possible, you know? Watch other people play the game. Watch solo queue. Don't play the game. You know, that's important. But like, I guess the bigger issue that we haven't talked about is the security issue, right? That's the biggest thing. We talked about the hardware issues, potential performance issues, but the bigger concerns that I think most people will have is how much access and how much of your personal information does Riot and any potential holding companies thereof have access to, in terms of your by having Vanguard. So
yeah, I mean, I'm pretty, I don't know if nihilistic is the right word, but like, I feel like we give an unprecedented amount of information to people voluntarily all the time. So I understand like why people are concerned. Like, I am also concerned. The idea of something having that much control over anything in my life that is not me gives me concern, because I am a control freak, and I worry constantly about everything. But in terms of like, compared to all of the other ways that we seed information like pretty consistently, I'm not surprised that people are concerned, but I also think that I don't know, man. It's just like everything feels so unsafe and tenuous in anything. Maybe that's just me because I'm terrified of like everything in life.
The world is falling apart and crumbling
Yeah,
around us.
like
Emily's like suddenly like thinking about this deeply, and she's never gonna leave her
yeah, I'm
house
just like, oh
again.
god,
She's
yeah,
immediately just gonna like unplug her PC and throw it against the wall.
yeah.
Uh,
In all honesty, I don't know how many people know this, but like I was actually like COVID did not do me any favors in terms of like leaving the house and like being terrified of other people.
yeah, I mean, I made the joke that COVID basically doesn't change gamer lifestyles. Anyway, uh, several times. Because it just kind of like preys on and reinforces the natural habit that we have, which is to never see the sun and to have
True.
massive vitamin D deficiencies. But more importantly, I do think it is significant because it's like, yes, we seed information. A lot of people seed information. You seed the types of information out to having a bank account by signing up for XYZ. Whenever you send your employment information over the internet, people have access to that. There are all sorts of cybersecurity hacks that access I don't know, a live journal account that you had in 12 years ago. I'm not speaking from personal experience. I might be speaking from personal experience. But you know, it's all those types of things that happen that end up exposing your information. But the difference is that literally anything that you've ever had remotely related to your PC, significant or not, it's also just like that has interfaced with your hardware is access, right? Like whereas you're seeding information voluntarily to things on the internet by signing up for whatever online service you're signing up for, this was like you literally cannot save any private information to your PC. Um, you cannot like hide it from your cloud, right? Like this would be normal, like have it on your hardware. You can't hide it from your cloud in a separate hidden folder. Vanguard can still access it, right? That's the main thing to think about. It's like you can't partition anything on your PC without Vanguard not being able to find it. So that I think that's like the main significant difference is that you're
Mhm.
not even kind of like naturally seeding things or not seeding things, or you're not you don't like to your point. As soon as you boot up your PC, it's on, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I can choose to disconnect from the internet right now and the stream will go down and whatever, but I then am not connected to the internet. I'm not able to leak anything over the internet at that point. So there's a pretty big difference, right? So I do think that if people think about it a little bit more, you start to ask, why does an anti-cheat program need to be on when my internet is off? Why does an anti-cheat program really need to be like constantly running at all moments in time at any given moment which my PC is on? I don't know. That's like a really good question, and I don't think that there is like an actual answer to that one. So yeah.
Think the other thing, so like in addition to the security thing, I think the thing that makes me sad is there are a few custom things that are going to be affected by this. I think most famously, a skin spotlights said that the like you basically you can't do custom skins, you can't do custom
Hmm.
maps,
Mm-hmm.
um, because they will be presumably detected as like cheats. I assume by Vanguard. So like a lot of I think it's like the camera, like whatever program they use to do like the actual spotlights, um, would not be able to be used. Which is sad. Like I think a lot of some content that you might not think would be affected by this will actively be affected by it. So that's another thing to keep in mind because obviously it's like presumably any program that affects League of Legends, the game, which
Mm-hmm.
will also include things like that.
So yeah, I think it's definitely something to think about. And like if you're interested in playing League, I think you should do a decent job of informing yourself of how it works. I've personally never played Val, so I don't have any experience with Vanguard personally. Um, so it's like gonna be a new thing for me. I don't know about other people, so I just basically we have this here just so that you can think about it. You can be informed. You can make whatever decisions you have about the situation and move on. Right. So that's more or less the update.
I think that's what most people are saying.
The other reason I wanted to bring it up is also that I mean there's like all the issues with DDoS and access and things like that with the LCK situation. I'm wondering if Vanguard will do anything in terms of like exacerbating potential situations like that. Again, I'm not a tech person. I don't know. It's just pure speculation. So
yeah, that is super speculative. I think the big thing, like if we want to move on to talking about the DDoS situation and the LCK, it's obviously different because they do not have Vanguard installed, and as far as I know, there's been no issue, no like large overarching issue in Korea with Vanguard being installed on like PCs for Valorant. I do know that it did initially, I believe, affect the amount of PC bongs that did install it. I don't know if that's like still a problem or a problem at all anymore. I do remember hearing a little bit about that, like initially on release for Valorant. But that aside, that actually has nothing to do with the DDoS issues in the LCK. It is like basically the DDoS scenario, like we talked about last time. It would have to be either something in the Korean client is giving out an IP address and there's an exploit to find it. So that's one thing, or the like the IP address of the LCK itself could have been leaked. I do think, and again, all of this, like this next part is pure speculation on my point because it happened again in the T1 Heretics series, and presumably they had probably changed IP addresses and put up other things in place to make sure that they didn't get DDoSed after what happened with TK DRX. And the first match was fine. And then the T1 Heretics match was the one that was affected, which was the second match. So presumably they had already put up something in place so it didn't affect the first match and it ended up affecting the second match. Now LCK has gone fully offline in a way that basically they are still playing from Well Park. They are pre-recording matches at a undisclosed time. So that essentially the timing of the matches is completely unknown. So the idea is, presumably, if there is an exploit in the Korean client that is allowing someone to know your IP address so you can overload it and cause a DDoS attack, the best way to mitigate that in the interim until you find out another solution is to be able to just say, okay, they don't know when we're playing. And as far as I'm aware, there have not been any issues with the matches thus far in terms of delays behind the scenes and DDoS attacks there. So that's a big thing to know. And the reason why I'm saying only the Korean client, and again, this is speculation. I know Ashley Kong tweeted about this. There was a popular streamer who essentially signed up and used the Chinese client, and he stopped getting DDoSed. So obviously, that's a very small sample size. He's a popular streamer, but they're thinking that it's something potentially on the Korean client side specifically. I don't know. Again, this is all highly speculative based on like the little information that we have available. But as of right now, the LCK matches, the actual like air time has also changed to be much later. And they're essentially pre-recording matches, not pre-recording as in like you know what's happened, but they are recording at a time with no audience and then broadcasting it later in the day.
So what's interesting to me is, as far as I know, the just for people who didn't see us talk about this last week, because there are a couple questions in chat. As far as I know, the TR accounts or the TR server that is being played on is the same server as that everyone plays on, except for China. They have a different server. It's the same server that everyone plays on, and obviously there are different like host ports. So there's like the Chicago server, the LA server, there's the South Korea Seoul server, etc. And then you basically are in the TR account, you choose the server that you're connecting to, and it's there. So it's like the same kind of LAN server, or the same like tournament realm. It's not the online Korean server. They're not playing on like the main online solo queue server for their comp matches. So again, because we talked about this last time, some of the speculation is that it would have to be someone like fairly close to the project who even gets the information that allows them to DDoS. And I'm also very curious, like, because it is very targeted towards Korea, why they wouldn't be able to do that for like NA games. I guess probably because it's a different local area network and it just operates out of the same client, but also an interesting question. So yeah.
That I do not know. Again, like I know very little about the entire situation in terms of like the actual mechanics of it. I did think it was interesting that streamer tested out going on the Chinese client. He didn't get DDoSed because also for people that didn't watch last week, the DDoSing of like popular streamers and pro players in Korean solo queue has been happening since roughly the initial Riot ID change. So if people remember when you had to change your ID to the Riot ID, that is like roughly around the time. This has all been reported by Ashley. So I'm going off of what she said. Because she would know a lot better than me and she can talk to a lot of the players or streamers, or at least be able to read their posts or watch their streams about it and understand. So that is also another thing that people should be aware of, just because this has been happening specifically in Korea to popular streamers and pro players for a while now. This year specifically, it's been like significantly on the rise, to the point where like we talked last week about how stream sniping and all this other bullshit has always been there for top pros in Korea, to the point where like their solo queue games are already like borderline unplayable. But this is a new level of like DDoS attacks that make it even more unplayable. So yeah, it's also something that's like, why would you DDoS the LCK? Outside of, I don't know, I guess the thrill of having an entire League of Legends league come to a screeching halt. Like, I'm obviously, if people can't tell from the tone of my voice, like really upset about this. It's a fucking shitty situation.
Yeah.
And yeah, it sucks. I'm sure the players are really unhappy about it. I know, I forget who mentioned it in an interview. Crap. There was a player who mentioned in an interview like that they had to get up early because they were pre-recording matches, and it also, and I'm sure we'll talk about this when we get to LCS a bit, but like things change when you are not in front of an audience, even if you're even if you're on stage, right? So this is not like full COVID era. It is, again, I have no idea what time they're recording at, but it's at an undisclosed time, but they're still turning the lights on at the studio. It's still happening at Lowell Park. That's where the casters are. That's where the analyst carpet is as well. So it's literally just the same, but at weird times without an audience.
Yeah, and I think we'll move that topic to that, because I think like one of the questions from that chat wanted answered from last night when we were brainstorming topics was like, how does having no audience impact matches? I think that's one separate topic, but the other one is a change in the schedule and a change in kind of your routine. Obviously, this is also something that comes up a lot in pro play, and your schedule varies just by having like the first game of the day or the first match of the day or the second match of the day. This will actually impact player performance quite a bit, because they're maybe used to a different sleep schedule, and they're used to peaking at a certain time of the day. Like, let's say you're designing your scrim schedule around peaking at like 3 p.m. and then some days your matches are at noon or at 1, or sometimes they're super late and the players are feeling like burnt out, so they don't play at the same time every day, so they're going to play a little bit worse, or a little bit better depending on what time it was. I know in spring on EG last year, it felt like every time we had a game at the end of the day, in the 5-game day, they just were almost guaranteed to lose. So it's just like, okay, when your players are peaking or doing or whatever. So if you have to drastically change your sleep schedule, and the time that you're playing is going to be very different from when you're practicing. Like, I assume the LCK scrim schedule is staying the same. At least for now, they might change it based on this. I don't, again, like, they're not publishing when the matches are actually being played, so it's, you kind of have to speculate that it would be at a wildly different time. So I think that from that perspective, it's like, okay, there's definitely going to be an effect on performance just from that factor, right? Before you're even in factoring the audience. So we can maybe use that to kind of transition into talking about the LCS in the cage experience this week, and then talk about the absence of a live audience more generally. So yeah.
Actually, really, so like in terms of set design, I wasn't sure what to expect, but they went full in on the cage match element, and I actually really liked it. I thought it was funny. It was a really fun setup. I heard so I heard from a few of my interviewees and other players, just when you're like standing around shooting the shit, that the white noise in the I keep wanting to call it Hell in the Cell, but obviously now we're gonna get copyright struck by the WWE. This stream, I mean, not LCS.
Only if we start wrestling right now.
True.
Anyway,
Raz and I did pretend to punch each other in the face. But yeah, I think the white noise apparently was like way louder. So some players are like, "Wow, I wish we could have this on the main stage in terms of like the white noise level," because it had to presumably be cranked up, because you are literally staring at your opponent from across the room, and they're very, very close. Like, the actual amount of space between players is really small. So presumably you would not want to be overheard by people. But in general, it was, so like, this is the other weird thing with LCS coming back in this particular format specifically after a 2-week break. So like two weekends of no stage matches, because, and I kept saying this as I was watching games throughout the weekend, I don't know why I didn't expect this. I watched the LPL. I've seen post-Lunar New Year play like every year. Yeah. It's always clowny. Like, it always is, right? Like, not having stage matches for that long a lot of the times when you come back to stage, you're just like, whoa, what is going on? We looked way better before the break. So in terms of like the actual player performance, I'm not sure how much to attribute to, like, obviously it sucks to play with no audience. It loses that kind of like, you get a lot of positive feedback. And I don't mean positive feedback like people saying, "Oh, you're so great." I mean like you feed off of the audience's energy.
Mhm.
And especially for something like this where you would want a kind of like the framework of a cage match to be like really high energy, like what Deserex does with
Yep.
the
Academy
like,
SmackDown.
yeah, Super Heavyweight SmackDown. I was like, what
Yeah.
does he call it? And what is the one that won't isn't attached to someone else's IP? Um,
Yep.
like you want that kind of energy, and that energy is like really best with an audience, just because the audience gets into it, you get into it. The more you get into it, the more audience gets into it, and it's like this really great positive feedback loop that happens and has been happening at LCS since we moved back to weekends, and our audiences have been really full. So yeah, that to lose that was kind of sad. But in terms of gameplay, I think part of it is the shift like not schedule in terms of timing. That would be LCK like you talked about, but like the shift in location and stuff like that. Um
Yep.
but part of it, I think, in terms of if we're looking at like gameplay, is also due to the break. And it happens again. I don't know why, like, I didn't have this in my head that this I like should have seen it coming, because post Lunar New Year play in LPL is sometimes like particularly clowny for those first few games back. So yeah, I think we saw something of that effect in the LCS this past weekend. For sure.
And I think it also depends on the team too, right? Because there's always the teams that just come back extremely strong after the Lunar New
Mhm.
Year break. And also, I think that the setting is a little bit different because definitely players do legitimately go home and spend time with their families for the Lunar New Year break.
Yeah,
Whereas
that's true.
here at LCS, you're just still scrimming.
Yeah,
So
as far as I
there's
know, there wasn't
definitely,
like a lot of actual
yeah, yeah.
vacation
I
time
mean,
taken.
there wouldn't be, right? They would probably just do one day off and then use that time to scrim like 6 days a week, for until the matches come back. So that's my assumption at least, and also like based on conversations I've had, seems accurate for most of the teams. Um, but yeah, so that plus like the LCK factor of not having the energy of that we mentioned before, of not having the energy of the crowd. It definitely like can probably feel a bit demoralizing. Like you look in the audience and there's like one guy with the sign versus um versus having like a full stadium. Because I was a coach when we didn't have like the massive live audience because it was weekday games, and it was definitely a very different vibe than when you're going to the arena and everyone's like super cheering on the teams. You hear through like the white noise. You have so much excitement, and I assume it's the same for LCK as well. Like, and I imagine the impact can be that the games feel a bit more like scrims, um, to an extent. So you're definitely gonna get like some scrim like play as a result. And I think to an extent we've had that, but I will like caution from the narrative that, LCS was way worse than normal and they'll be back to normal next week. I think that we saw glimpses of this kind of like wacky, disorganized, long game back and forth, like all splits, and it's a little bit disingenuous to argue that, it's way worse than normal. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't I think it was not way worse than normal. I did think it was a little bit more of a fiesta though. The The other thing I'll say is like I think like you said, depending on team,
Mhm.
a lot of teams really feed off of audience energy in a positive way, and then some other
Mhm.
teams have said sometimes or players have said it makes them kind of nervous. I do remember like JoJo specifically when he was sick, he was so mad that he could not like he won like player of the
Yeah.
week, and I had to do a player of the week interview with him remotely just
Yep.
because if you're sick, you had to play remote. You know this because you were the coach at the time. He was just like, yeah, man, like I can't wait to get back to stage. Playing from home sucks. Like, so there are a lot of players who are just really, really, really feed off of the idea that you are like in front of a crowd and performing.
Mhm.
And you definitely lose that with no audience.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna name names, just like name and shame JoJo
It's
like that.
it's lit
But
it's literally in the player of the week interview that we cut
no, no,
and
no.
went public.
It's just funny to me because like when he had COVID, he was for sure just like I don't know, like having such a bad schedule for himself, and obviously he was sick, so that will happen naturally anyway. But like having such a bad schedule for himself, and then like the game quality dropped significantly as well because he had just gotten that, but it was just like for him, I think a lot of it was legit the fact that I'm at home, right?
Mhm.
Um, like his scrim performances were worse and all of those things. I think in his mind it wasn't necessarily because he was sick. A lot of it was because he was at home, right? So I think for sure that it's gonna affect a lot of players. Though I feel like JoJo has been performing very well in the
Oh
cage
yeah.
match setting. So
Yeah. No, I thought he
yeah,
did great actually in
yeah,
both of his
yeah,
matches. So
yeah.
that was
So
not it was not an effect this time. But
yeah,
I do
yeah.
remember
Yeah, of course.
doing that player of the week interview, and I was like, I'm surprised you're saying this, but yeah. I was essentially making a joke about how Zazel like cuz I ask questions, I don't realize sometimes that I'm, you know, teeing people up to figuratively knock it out of the park in a way. So, I don't know if that makes me a good
Nice.
interviewer or bad interviewer or both.
I don't are you saying you're not good at teeing them up or you are good at teeing them up?
I'm too good at
You're too good at teeing them up.
to the point where I get concerned that I am going to get in trouble.
Oh. Is this official concern or is this your concern?
No, this is just me being
Okay.
concerned because I'm a
Well,
nervous person who
stop being
thinks
concerned.
I'm gonna get fired every day.
That's that's like a good interview quality. Yeah. Oh man. I tee up this person to give really good one-liners. It's really bad for the product. Yeah, totally. Like I don't know. I'm such a bad interviewer.
Oh god.
What even is this
All
logic? It's like
right, we're moving on. We're moving on. Enough about I feel like this episode has been like my insecurities. It's like a
Oh
therapy
no.
session.
I didn't even realize I had triggered multiple of them, but we'll
I know,
continue.
right?
Yes, excellent. All right. So, yeah. I did before we talk about game quality, I did kind of want to talk about the LEC news that we had this week, which was Perkz being benched for by Team Heretics for his Zwyroo. The
Mhm.
classic Marcin Jankowski XD. The XDs are hitting the LEC Twitter. I
Yep.
think the basically all that was really released was that it was a dispute with organizations management, and we had talked about the Adam news before, and it was kind of similar vibes, right? Which was like
Mhm.
dispute between management, unproductive in scrims, whatever it was. So it's very interesting to me that it's like coming 1 or 2 weeks after that. Yeah, because there was a gap week. But what's sort of your take on I don't know the animals taking over the asylum in LEC allegedly. So the internal war.
The internal war between players and management. Yeah, I mean, again, this is like, so initially, because I am also just bad at knowing scheduling, for some reason I thought LEC was back like this weekend. It's not. It's back next week. So I was like, whoa, again, like timing. And even then, timing was very bizarre for this, considering that I believe it came out, or there was a rumor that he'd like performed in, like, he'd played scrims like earlier that day, I think. Or like as recently as within 24 hours. Perkz had. So it was, again, like really, really sudden. I know no details. That just tells me that, similarly to what I said about the Adam situation, whatever happened must have been like incredibly irreconcilable
Yep.
to have it be like that quick, because
Mhm.
I think you just can infer a lot from timing. And whenever something is just immediate like that, is always just tells me like, oh, there's a very specific like flashpoint that happened, and it
Yep.
is apparently irreconcilable between both parties.
I think it's, for me, it's like somewhat symptomatic of a bit of a changing of the guard, because historically, and I know Medio's talked about this a lot because he comes from an era that was very player run as well. And
Mhm.
then of course Perkz to an extent is also from that era. I feel like G2, like the original lineup was set up to be very much kind of in control. The players, I mean, themselves being very much in control and kind of like getting, this is the way that we've always done it. This is the way that we're gonna do it. Like very much the boys' club. There were always the memes about like Perkz talking to people at the pool, right? And that was how the rosters were signed. It
I
was just
do
like
remember that.
Perkz was like a GM, coach, secret leader, whatever. So the idea that there could be a clash with management, I think, just ends up being, like, I don't want to say a symptom of bad coaching, but I also want to say a symptom of bad coaching. Which was, it's just like there wasn't necessarily, well, it's a symptom of bad coaching or bad management, not necessarily both. Where it's like, okay, the coach is not given authority by the org, so therefore the coach
Mm-mm.
cannot really reinforce anything, but also the coach is not commanding authority himself, so the players are basically controlling everything about how the team is run. And that I think is like transition, like a lot of teams are transitioning away from that model. And so you'll have players who are used to finding success in a very specific run way, and when they're suddenly being told by the org or their coach that no, this isn't how it's being done anymore, there will be a lot of conflict. Like very obviously, there'll immediately be conflict. So that's why I think we are seeing like some incidences like this like come to a head and reach the public eye. I don't necessarily know if that's exactly what's happening with the Perk situation, but that's definitely like why there would be increased incidences of it now, right? Like information leaked that someone is being benched for either behavioral reasons or disagreements with management, right?
Yeah. I think like the weird thing about it now, or not weird thing, but like I feel like there are, like, having a team is going to be continuous conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like any, and this isn't saying, like, this isn't me coming out and being like, all teams fight with each other all the time and it's terrible and it's miserable. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that
That's why we put
when
them in the
you,
cage. Anyways, go
yeah,
ahead.
that's why we have to put it in the cage. Uh, God. But like, you work with other with other people, you're going to have like conflict always. especially with most of the ages of people that we're working at, especially when you initially come into the league as a rookie. And I think like a lot of times we don't hear about it because like
Mhm.
that's what tells me these were kind of like larger incidents. Only because like conflict happens all the time and it's not even a bad thing necessarily. Um, it's more about like, okay, if you disagree with someone on how something is run, even if you say it in the wrong way, like how is that like, you say it in a very aggressive way or you become super defensive and you kind of let your emotions dictate a conversation when you shouldn't. Which literally happens to every single one of us, guys. I don't care if you think you're an emotionless robot. I've tried to be, doesn't work. I think like you have to mitigate that somehow, and the best teams are the ones that are able to mitigate those kind of conflicts, whether it's between players, whether it's between players and management, um, and kind of like move forward from there. That doesn't mean there is no conflict. It just means that it's resolved in a way that both parties have an understanding going forward of what's going to happen. And to see two successive incidents like this in a row is noticeable to me because of that. Just because I think like conflict happens all the time. I think an underrated aspect of League of Legends coaching actually, because like generally people look at like how well do you know the game, like what is your analytical level of the game, and obviously that's super important. But I would argue that the more important thing, and you were actually a coach, so you can totally flame me for this take if you want, but like I'd argue the more important thing is actually understanding like how people receive information, how they express information, and making sure that everyone from players to management, you understand that, and then you have to go about like mitigating conflict between them in a way that is constructive and not destructive.
No, I mean, I think that's for sure. I say this a lot. Like, I think the most overlooked aspect of coaching is definitely personality management. I think that's one of the things that ex-player coaches struggle with the most, is just kind of the realization that, oh, there is like a good part of this job that's basically babysitting. And it's not, I'm not even meaning that in like a talking down sort of way. It's more just like you have a lot of kids who've never lived
Hmm.
outside of their homes before, and they spend like 14 hours a day, 6 days a week in the same room together, um and I'm an only child, so I don't have this experience, but I am told that it's very common that siblings fight. So it's like, and a lot of that is
Like,
just being in close proximity with each other,
yeah.
and there being limited resources. So in a way, a team is kind of like a family, and the gold is kind of like giving the like toy to the top laner for this game, and then you give the toy to the ADC for the next game, and you need to make
Oh
sure
my god.
that there's no favorites and that the kids are getting the toys, but some kids will actually just excel and get straight A's and do better than the other kids, and those kids will help the family succeed. Anyway, I'm taking this analogy way too far. The point is you have to be aware of all of these dynamics, and it's definitely going to be a factor that causes people to like get along or not, or to disagree or not agree. And obviously the famous thing that almost everyone says is the team that wins is not the team that plays the best League of Legends or has the peak understanding of the meta. The team that wins at the end of the split is the team that does not mental boom and want to kill each
Hmm.
other. So,
True.
yeah, that's definitely a big part of coaching, and sometimes for the sake of, sometimes the best decision is to like bench a star player or bench like a really popular player, so that the team cohesion and the overall vibes. We always say on the LPL co streams that like you got to do the vibes check when you're making a prediction, like who's feeling the vibes, because they might have an increased chance of winning. So like definitely, if someone's ruining the vibes, sometimes you gotta bench the biggest star so that everyone else just performs way better. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how Team Heretics do.
Yep. And obviously, this is all complete 100% speculation. It could have been something completely different. So, but it is a very
This
interesting
entire
conversation.
thing has been like speculation. The episode, we're like, we have pieces of information around this.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what I realize, like, the more I'm on teams, is like popular analysis is literally, and Reddit comments is literally just like 100% speculation, and no one actually knows what's going on behind the scenes. And in many cases, it's like way more mundane than you would imagine, so it's chill. But yes, we can transition into some gameplay topics. I think it's a good timing to talk about, I think the best way to transition into gameplay topics is to briefly discuss, like, if we think that there's going to be a massive change to Heretics because of Zwyroo. I think the thing for me is that's very exciting by Zwyroo is that Zwyroo is kind of like the Sudsy, and I'm doing it again. I'm explaining something with something even more obscure. He's basically made it to like the top of EMEA multiple times and gotten replaced on lineups that have won EMEA when like majorities of those lineups have gone on to like play LEC or whatever. He's consistently done well, and he hasn't necessarily gotten like a good shot at it. So I'm excited for him. I think like injecting a new element into the team can be really helpful. So we'll see how it goes.
Oh, a lot of people said that. I think it was Veteran who said, like, he was basically like, this is not a bad roster move. Like, it's weird. It's one of a case where like weird circumstances lead to like a potentially good roster move, which I found kind of interesting. I haven't watched him like again. The thing I know the least about is probably ERLs. And I'll be really upfront with that. So I haven't seen him play. I do know a lot of people would be curious to see him in an LEC setting, not because he's like this upcoming, like super young, like just entered and is like lighting people on fire, but because he's been consistently like pretty good, like pretty good to great. And so when you get to that level, you do get curious as to how a player like that would do on an actual like major league team, if there's a way to promote up. So,
and as a Twitch chatter did point out, like EG did quote unquote talk to him. So I did watch quite a bit more Zwyroo tape. And I do think he's pretty good. Like he plays like pretty decently well on mages. I think his ear is really strong. I think he'll do well. So, and like Heretics definitely, like, something on that roster needs to change, and obviously they're already making a support change, so it's good to see him back. I actually felt like, because I remember the finals that he played with Jack Spectra, etc., that roster before they became before they bought their way into LEC, and I actually thought he was like the MVP of the finals. Like I thought he played pretty well. And then he didn't get to start LEC when they bought their way in. So very unfortunate for him. Glad he is getting his start quite a bit later, but glad he's getting an opportunity to play for the org that he like won an EMEA title with. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing to point out about Heretics is obviously Trimby coming on.
Yep.
I think that will be really interesting to see. I was shocked that he didn't have a team at the beginning of winter. And then the other thing to point out is just, I think the design of this roster was kind of like G2 reunion tour, right? Where you're
Yep.
trying to rely on players pre-existing synergy with each other, particularly with Wonder, Yonkos, and Perkz. And so if you take Perkz out of that situation, then the question becomes like, what does this team look like? Because I would have assumed that he would be a very strong voice in what they were doing previously. So that's something to also watch out for, because I think with this, like, presuming that all this speculation is true and this is what's happening, because again, there's no official announcement on this. Not that I've seen anyway. If there is, someone let me know in chat. But the actual like roster building ideology is a little bit like that foundation is cracked, right? So now we're moving in a completely different direction, which will also be interesting to see that pivot after only one split of the kind of G2 reunion tour attempt.
So there's someone saying then, of course, there's a lot of Polish players now, because it's like Zwyroo.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yonkos,
Zwyroo is also...
Trimby. So someone made the joke, "You're not Polish by." Anyway,
Oh, no.
that's a good one from Rainiora in chat at the moment. Anyway, yeah, so I think that that's like a good kind of kickoff there. We'll have a lot more LEC stuff to talk about because there'll be games next week. And then, of course, now we can transition into some LCS topics. Someone did say before we move on that they have a bone to pick with Emily, Matt Scoot, too, on her pre-week MVP candidates pyramid. She said she had at least one from every team, but there was one notable team missing.
Wait, was there?
Yeah, that's what they said. I don't remember.
Who did I miss?
So I don't know if Matt's good too wants to update us on who she misses. Then
Should have been what? JoJo,
TL,
XU,
apparently?
Contracts, Insanity. Oh, Fox, did I miss?
Chat is saying you missed Liquid.
Did I not put? I thought I threw in there. Literally, so I just wanted to do 3 because I was like, this isn't too early MVP, but it also kind of is, because I think I said this on broadcast, the last minute, like 5-game push is going to be way more heavily weighted than the beginning of the season, either fairly or unfairly. And I do think that currently, and even still, even after the games this week, the top MVP candidates are, like, for me anyway, River and then Whippo Inspired. And that's like it. That's all I submitted. And producers told me I could not do that. So
Rude.
that, and then I was like, okay, well, if you do have a team making like an insane run across the back half, right? Just like absolutely insane, then maybe I'll put a bunch of other people on other teams.
No boost.
But yeah, like
tisk.
No.
Oh wow,
Sorry.
rude. Just
I
instantly
I think he's been performing really well.
Just instantly gone.
But in terms
anyway,
of MVP candidates.
All right.
So if we're up to me, I would have put 3.
But I mean the meaty LCS gameplay topic, now that we've gotten that out of the way. Emily just said everyone sucks except for these 3 players. So sorry, TL fans. No MVP candidate for you.
Oh my god.
The main question is, are NRG and C9 quote unquote back? So are they back? They both went 2-0 this week, Emily.
They did 2-0. I'll say this. I really liked C9's, like, not that I actually liked both their drafts. For C9 specifically, I particularly liked their first draft. Because even though I know people are going to be like, fuck Nidalee Renekton. This shit sucks. Get it out of here, because people remember how bad, they remember how bad it's looked in a lot of ways. I think C9 are actually a really good team to execute something like that based on the players that they have. I really liked how they took over the top side of the map and then used that pressure. I thought it was really good. Obviously, also having the Senna helps, and I know we have a Senna topic, later on in the show, probably coming up next. But in terms of that draft specifically, I was like, this is great. This is C9 playing comfort in a way that they can execute on very, very well. And I really liked that. The second game, I don't have bones to pick with the draft, but I think their execution of it was if I'm looking at what I really enjoy seeing out of C9, it would not necessarily be with a draft like that. I don't think they played around with it. I don't think they played with it as optimally as you would want to. Timing of contesting certain things was off, in my opinion. I think Inspired at one point popped off in cast where he was like, if I was the C9 coach, I'd just be like, why are you fighting here? I forget whether I agreed specifically with him in that moment, but I do think they did have some moments in that second game where you could still see I don't know if the wheels coming off is fair, because I don't think it is. I think they did look a lot more well coordinated as a unit. But when I'm thinking of I'm looking at this draft and I'm like, okay, you have the Ivern to protect, you have the Jace poke, you have Smolder, who's going to do really, really well late. We got to see this comp kind of end up coming online and absolutely decimating later on. But it was really shaky given a few of their objective contests early where you might not want to be contesting TL at certain times. But I didn't dislike this draft. It's just more, if I want to see C9 and I want to see them look way more well coordinated, I think the first draft was a really good example of okay, this team has improved in terms of coordination, which is nice. It's nice to see. I mean, I think, again, the players on this team are really talented, so I want to see them succeed as a unit. I was very curious to see how that would work, and I don't think they've figured it all out yet. So I don't know if back is the way to say it, but I think they looked better as a team than they had before the break.
So back.
As for
oh my god.
As for NRG, I feel like they
Well,
looked.
we'll do C9 first.
Yeah.
Just so we break it up a bit. I think for me, there was a lot of comments that I agreed with on Inspired's second game cast. The most notable one was, I think, the biggest thing that worked for them is they're putting AD on scaling bot and putting Vulcan on Nautilus. Nautilus duty, engage duty for the rest of eternity. I think that's the biggest change. I think that's the biggest improvement for them. That will definitely help the most. I liked that they were playing much more around Fudge. I think when Blabber in his career has been the most proactive, it's when he's been playing around top. Specifically, I'm thinking of the previous Talia Renekton era. In 20, I think it was 2021. I want to say, yeah, I think it was 2021. The Talia Renekton era where they were just full on camping top, hard snowballing. With this kind of setup, it was when people first started not running TP top, and they could really get huge punishes like that. So I think that's sort of what I think about when I think of Blabber being proactive, is him playing around Fudge in the top lane. So I was glad that they kind of went to that. I think that they're a bit limited in terms of mid champions that they can run with that style. There's a certain champ that starts with A. and Dinar. That I mean, they're probably going to default to as a massive crutch until they figure out a little bit more nuance in how they want to play. Um, because otherwise, like a lot of JoJo's picks are very skirmish heavy around mid. So it'll be really interesting to see like that style come in more. And I was glad that they tried to work the Ivern in because I think that that will fit that kind of like mid skirmish style a bit more. The I think for me again, and then Vulcan like proactively going top and looking for those plays
Yeah.
around Jace was really nice. So like all of those things were great. I think the sloppy fights were very stereotypical, like around Baron, were very stereotypical of one, JoJo, and two, C9. JoJo will call to pull Baron like all the time. And then C9 will found a lot of success playing like just scaling fights around Baron Perma. And so you kind of combine like the wonky C9 force comeback fights around Baron with like force Baron calls, and then the map state being like a complete disaster and TL taking very good advantage of it. I think like there was one sequence where Impact basically just got one inhib and then wrapped around and got the other inhib, all while C9 were just like perma on the Baron and not addressing their side waves at all. Like for me, that was kind of what I expected. I think that they will, when their team fighting synergy is working really well, that's when this team will peak, and that's what they'll be good at. They'll be like a really, really good kind of like scaling team fighting team, and that will be where they'll shine the most. And I think that they're on their way to kind of like executing on that vision. The other thing I agreed with Inspired on was they played Jace for fun to see if people will think about it when it comes to playoffs because
Oh my god.
it definitely did not work out for them, and traditionally and historically it has not really worked out for them that well. So there you go.
Yeah.
Fun little Jace game in there.
I think one cool thing that did happen, and obviously you and I've been seeing it in LPL already, not only when they were on 14.4, but in particular when they were on 14.4, is this idea of having a lot more engaged supports. It's also been happening in LCK as well, especially if you can get Senna, but even if you don't, because Senna, you can do the rotate for grubs, push top thing that's now become kind of a staple of gameplay for some teams, which we have already covered in previous episodes, even with actual gameplay footage. But
Yeah.
I think the cool thing is that a lot of LCS supports, specifically Vulcan in particular, is one that I know. When I had the TLA reunion episode of pros during the break, they were all trying to talk around saying outright that Vulcan is playing engaged supports again, ergo C9 looks a lot better. But I think if you do have a support like Vulcan, he is going to be so much better because his roam, like he knows those roam timers. He knows when he can do cheeky ganks top. He's really well aware of all of that, and through his career, his best splits have been when he can make it like take the most advantage of that. And I mean, I think that's good for a lot of LCS supports, but in particular, I think Vulcan gets like this team as a whole benefits so much from Vulcan being able to roam and occasionally act like a second jungler, but if not, at the very least, disrupt other lanes with tanky engagers like Nautilus.
Yep. I think it'll be interesting. I feel like I will say yes, they're so Barack.
They're back.
They're back. But I think that that's just because they're actually trending towards the form that will be good for them. Not necessarily, and I think like the fundamental problem is kind of a way in terms of them trying to figure out how to work together. So they aren't quite there yet, but they're heading towards whatever that peak form will look like. Maybe it doesn't get much better than this, but who knows? All right, NRG, go.
Watching the Huhi Nautilus just get three manned, and then like they send the whole team, and then they still can't kill this fucking Nautilus was so hilarious to me. At one point, I did remember, like, because they did the Senna swap, right? But it went on for so long that Senna was not in that lane, so it was literally just Seraphine versus Nautilus in the bot lane. I was like, what are we even doing? What are we even doing? Not that I thought it was a bad call by either team. That's not what I'm saying. But it's more like, what have we become? What has the game become? Where we just have Seraphine laning against Nautilus and bot. But like existential crisis
ADC
about the state of League of Legends aside, and the state of AD carries in 2024. The first NRG game was really hilarious. Mainly because it got to the point where TL just could not do enough damage to kill the Nautilus. And I think overall, like, I was really shocked that Senna got through all 4 times on blue side on the first day. Not only because she's super strong and we've already seen her taking over in LPL and LCK, but also just because for NRG and 100 Thieves specifically, 2 teams that already been playing Senna a bunch, 2 teams that I would look out for, like, don't let them play Senna, maybe. I was really surprised that it didn't get banned on red side against either of those teams on day 1. So for NRG, I think this can be a really good meta for them, like I said last week, because of Senna's strength, and also because they might be able to flex some picks between mid and top, which then brings me to their next game, which we saw the Vayne top. It ended up working out, technically.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting look because I know Dokla has been spamming
It won
range
the game,
top
so
in solo queue. This is not the first time he has played Vayne top.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think range tops are a bad idea for NRG even. I did think in this game it was a little weird, and it also did not work early. So obviously this is a really specific counter pick that did not end up working as a counter pick until a bunch of other things in the game happened, and then Vayne was just like online and destroying people. So in terms of like our NRG back, again, I think this meta should be something that's pretty comfortable for them. I think even in their like, because like back for NRG is very different than back for the C9 roster, because back for the C9 roster is based almost entirely on expectations. But for NRG, save the addition of Huhi, and Huhi himself comes with years and years and years of tape, and then this NRG like core comes with a year of tape, and it's just like,
and then topside
what is
like another year. So
yeah, topside is like add a year. So what is back for this roster? Because I feel like a lot of their like opportunity areas are sometimes the same opportunity areas that they've had. But I think an NRG that works really well is able to recognize that and like play to their own strengths. So I don't think they're there yet, but in terms of the looks we saw, even the Vayne top, I think is something that you look at it and you're like, oh, I can see NRG trying this, because not only has Dokla been spamming these in solo queue, but because there is a history of them trying stuff out like this in previous drafts over the course of the past 2 years. So like back for NRG, like I would say they're back in the context of how NRG can be back. Are they back to like a championship winning form? I think definitely not.
Get back to 2023 spring, which was arguably their worst placement since they didn't make playoffs or they were bottom 8 or whatever. I don't remember exactly what their first split placement was, but basically their worst placement since their very first split together was 2023 spring. So yeah, good. No, I mean, I think I'm glad that the broadcast did give the stat of like how many games had NRG won, what percentage of games had NRG won by this time in summer, right?
Yep.
And it was actually lower. I was glad that they did that because I was like, I'm telling you guys, they were fucking worse last year. They were like way worse than this. The thing
I'm glad you felt validated by a broadcast.
Yes. they finally had the correct narrative.
Yeah.
You know? Finally. But the other element, I mean, we opened the split perfect gaming match. Banger. The EG C9 NRG perfect game. But I think that was a fun one. I think but for me, the thing about the Vayne that was very funny was they had a very great draft otherwise. I was like Talia, Poppy into because I just went over this last night, Callista, etc. And it was just
Callista like, should have like it should be unplayable for her.
It was a very good draft, and then they picked the Vayne top,
and then we yeeted the Vayne top.
A nice chill Ornn or something like that. I think Juves, one of their army of coaches, said that he like gave them a speech before, you know, we need to just have fun again, and then they had fun playing Vayne top. is what he said. So I don't know if that's the approach, then maybe there's that, but it's like a lot of those energy games. I want to say though, NRG had pretty clean early games towards the end of their run last year. Like, so that's the main thing I'm looking for when I'm assessing like how good NRG are looking. And the biggest problems that I had with that game were actually some of the decision making in terms of how they're playing the map. They were really hard forcing like the bot 3v3 with contracts. Contracts ended up falling significantly behind based off of how he was playing that. And then also like the Vayne situation, I think there were a lot of missed opportunities where he could have maybe looked for a lean top, or he could have looked for something like that, and it also would have just been better for his game, and he would have been able to farm more efficiently as well. So there were a lot of moments in that where I was kind of not used to that type of early game decision making. And I mean, the lane felt like it was just Giga lost off of one bad trade situation where Dokla just gets eat on top of instead of like doing the Q trade correctly, and it's just so it's honestly like good on IMT for executing on that, because I wouldn't expect them to, so you know, normally, so that was like a good look for them. Contracts leveling up his spike game, you know, all good stuff.
Yeah. So. He looked so tired after that.
So I guess
I was just interviewing him and I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely one of those. It was similar to like when I had talked to him after the perfect game, and he's like, you know, we do a bit of trolling. Like it's just it is what it is. It's like, oh, I just decided to lose the game that day. It's fine. But I mean, like, in the answer to the question, are they back? Kind of. Like, they're back to being. They're on course for having. They're ahead of schedule in terms of last split.
Yeah.
You know, they're ahead of schedule. But they're early games, which is like the cleaner early games, which is what I'd kind of look for. Not so much.
Yeah, we haven't like they had some, especially last year. I remember one of the games I guest cast actually was a like insane contracts performance. I think
Hmm.
against C9 actually. Um where he was just like all over the map, and they were really, really making the most of their early lanes. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I
Yep.
think they're back in terms of NRG and what I know of them. And I
But
say this with
the
love because I really, really have actually a lot of affection for this team.
non-rational Giga Chads, as their socials
Yeah.
media said. All right. So that's the Energy C9 back topics. So the next one we'll do the Senna Smolder. Which one is more OP? And then the last topics are a bit more for fun. So, all right.
I think people are probably going to say Smolder, right? Because I don't know. That's like the late game, I guess. You get to 225 and then you just fuck everyone over. I would still say Senna is more OP for so many reasons.
I figured you would say Senna. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Senna offers you so much flexibility in draft, like just from the get go, before you even look at like what she does in game. I think you can essentially through just having her doing a fasting Senna buff up a lot of like more supportive characters who would already be pretty strong because they just get like supports get more gold now overall. In particular, we've seen it with Nautilus and Tom Kench. But and I'm not just talking about LCS, I'm talking about everywhere. But also you can throw actually a lot of things in bot lane
Hmm.
and allow them to CS while also having Senna get stronger through soul farming. And additionally, she like so first of all, she just offers so much flexibility compositionally. She brings a lot to any team in terms of her kit. And then I also really like what people have been doing with the um essentially it's like not a lane swap in the traditional sense, but it I think is kind of as close to a lane swap as we're gonna get with the way that lane assignments work now. Um, with teams sending her up to contest grubs and essentially allowing the farming champion to
Hmm.
kind of sit in lane, um, and then use her for a grub push. So not only can she be formidable in lane, offer comp flexibility, and then can be rotated around to try to take objectives, especially with a push that you can get from grubs. Um, she's also really strong late as well. So I think I don't know. She, in comparison to Smolder, who I think is definitely less, especially with the changes, less bad in lane than people like. I think people still have a mindset of like this champ is turbo dog shit in lane. That's not necessarily true anymore, especially now that people have kind of figured out how to play him a bit better. Um, but obviously, he's still gonna get pushed in by some other lanes. I'm not saying he's like insane at laning now, but um I think Smolder is kind of the dream of like we just have to get to this point in the game and then we take over and we can play around it really well. Um, I also think that teams in general may not have figured out how to play around that as well as they would have liked. I know talking to XU, he brought up that he thought a lot of teams weren't actually like it's not that Smolder is bad, it's that a lot of teams weren't playing around him correctly in order to make the most of his abilities. But yeah, I like, and this could just be me as an analyst, but I like the flexibility and everything that Senna provides, where I think even when Smolder is incredibly strong, he's a lot more inflexible.
So I will use your framework then for arguing a case for Smolder. I think Smolder can be flexed in 3 lanes. I think Smolder basically can be left solo and
Mhm.
have like whatever sport you're pairing with him roam like reasonably well. Even if you lose plates, etc., you're sort of safe with like the flap flap flap, relatively okay wave clear, etc. And then like the other element of Smolder is if you're doing Smolder v Senna in a game at about like 30 minutes, doesn't matter how much Senna's giving you, how much range she has, how much crap she does. If you have an engage or a gap close or a decent flank, Smolder just insta one shots her with 1Q. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't know. I feel like Smolder is just like it. This is gonna be for me. I think this topic is gonna be an are you an LCK or an LPL watcher? Because
Mhm.
I think if you're an LCK watcher, you're going to say that Senna is super OP. There's nothing that beats it. It's too insane. It runs all around the map. It does all these things. It's so good. If you're an LPL watcher, you're gonna be like, damn, BLG can just pick Smolder, and it doesn't matter if their mid game is
And do
complete
nothing.
trash.
Yeah.
And it's just like, all right, sick. Smolder must be the most broken champ in the game. I mean, straight up like OMG, just 1, 2, 3s. Viego, Smolder, Braum. Like, what even is that draft? And shits on JDG for fun. Like, I don't. And then you see the snake on like the second to the last place team in the league. The snake EDG's ADC picks Smolder and gets a double kill in like the first 5 minutes of the game. And it's just like, and it's all right, I guess. Like the game's just over. There's nothing we can do now. It's just that's just the way it is. It just feels like there's so little counterplay, and I think part of the reason why um people like know how to use Senna better. Like she's been around for a very
Yeah.
long time. Whereas I think Smolder's brand new, and you're gonna see a lot more Smolder fails before people start to realize like how oppressive this champion actually is, and how many situations you can play him in, how many different builds he can run, how many lanes he can do, what the matchup potential is, the fact that his laning phase will be better, like all of these things. So I'm Team Smolder. But again, like that's probably a team. Are you team LCK or are you team LPL kind of thing? And so yeah, I think that's probably how it's gonna end up working out.
This is funny because I feel like the past 2 weeks have been you taking the LPL position and me just returning to my LCK roots of like 2014.
It's back. It's back,
We'll
guys.
see. We'll see. We'll have to keep track of this. Because yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
am Team Senna, even though I actually do agree that people are not making the most of like. I not only agree with XU that people aren't like LCS teams more specifically, but as a whole as well, people aren't making the most of Smolder in terms of bot lane. But they also are eschewing the fact that he can definitely be played in other lanes too, and it's just a matter of like what is the matchup there.
Yep. It'll be interesting. And you know, the one Senna lost this week was versus Smolder in LCS. I'm just throwing that out there.
True. A
Yeah.
one game
Results-based
sample
analysis.
size.
Results-based analysis coming in hot. All right. The last kind of topics are
Speaking
a
of,
bit for fun. DK versus KT.
oh god,
I think my chat just likes to see you in pain, so they just wanted you to talk
it
about this.
hurts
So go
so
ahead.
bad. They really should have won that series. I'm so mad. How did they lose game one? Anyway, my like KT induced trauma aside, I mean, speaking of Smolder, we did see it even in the KT's like actual clear win, almost pull off the miracle after like a fight topside. Um, but yeah, I mean this game was just this match in general. Like I'm not sure what people want me to talk about. I'll go back to my notes, but like both of these teams, I think solidified, like if you weren't convinced before, because obviously KT had the weird ups and downs in a lot of their games, whereas DK were very firmly like cannot beat teams above them in the standings, will absolutely shit on teams below them in the standings. That one like giant 7-hour monstrosity that was their series against TRX, like take that out, and they were pretty consistently like really beating up on teams below them. And then you have to go back to like the Kwangdong game for another example of like, oh, this team's really struggling. So you had two kind of inconsistent teams in terms of like where you might want to place them, and this very firmly established like the T1 and Gen G at the top in 1-2, and then HLE in third, and then a drop off, and then DK and KT like fighting it out. And maybe Kwangdong is in there if they can like punch up in the right spots. This, like, I don't know, man. I don't know what people want me to talk about. How KT just like randomly punt their leads all the time. How Lucid had, I think, the most horrendous performance that I've seen from him in a series, and then make it all up with that rel engage at Elder. I think he got player of the game for that too, if I'm not mistaken, in game 3. Yeah. I mean, game 2 or game 3 in particular was like where I was really losing my mind, because it was almost an hour long, and it was definitely like a, you know how we used to have like really long games before Elder, and people are like, why did they add Elder to the game? KT DK game 3 is a really good example of why we did. So we didn't have another like, what was that? Raz always hates this when I bring it up because he was on Dig at the time, but like the Dignitas Renegades match that like broke a record set by I think like Jin Air like 2 days before or something like that. Like, yeah, that's what this like really took me back. So not only was I tilted, but it also, I was like reliving like some really weird times in League of Legends.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, don't even ask me how KT lost. Like God, they had so many opportunities to win in both game 1 and game 3.
Their super
then,
minions,
like I said,
almost won. Their super minions
I know,
almost won the game.
they
for
took
them in
out
game
2
3.
next.
Come on.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I will say this: the KT I do like the best. I think we saw the iteration of that in game 2. With, I think, similar to how I feel about certain other supports, Beryl also falls into the category of a support that I actually do want playing something like Tinky with Engage, because I think he is a lot better when he is kind of roaming around like he did on the Nautilus in that game 2 in their early game. And I think that game, the topside fight that extended it briefly with Smolder getting, I think, 4 kills off of it, aside, I think that is, as a KT fan, like that is the best like iteration of like, what do I want this particular roster to be able to do? That game 2 is like, okay, if we could play like this with fewer mistakes, we would actually be a good team. But KT cannot do that. So I don't actually, especially after this series, have like particularly high expectations for either team to be able to be a dark horse to win LCK. Like, if anything, this series firmly told me that neither of these teams are winning LCK.
Speaking of family analogy, Emily is just like these are her children, right? That she's talking about, DK and KT. She has to acknowledge that they're just failures all the time. Just
It's like my parents talking to me.
bringing them up. Oh no! Speaking of neuroses, this being the
I
end of
know,
the neuroses
right?
episode. All right. But I think to summarize the series on my end, I'm just gonna pull up the notes that I took while watching it. All right.
Yeah, I'm looking. My
Uh,
notes just become like incomprehensible.
Poppy OP, Lucid basing again, Showmaker ports to his death. Smolder only loses because he's in the base. KT Super's almost won game 3. That's literally all I wrote about this
True.
game.
Beautiful. I think that sums it up perfpperfectly.
This entire
Nothing more needs
series.
to be said.
Two like 50-minute games, and that's all I wrote about it. Yeah, my favorite is definitely Lucid bases again.
Lucid had
Run.
a bad time. Like as someone who has been kind of a Lucid defender in terms of like, oh, he came in, he was pretty good at team fighting. He's looking better at like communicating with his lanes. This series like took all of that away until the final engage, which was like a good individual engage, but then going forward I'm like, okay, for DK, like, so I ranted enough about KT because I'm obviously like actually emotionally invested in KT from like a deep rooted fan perspective. But we've talked a lot about D plus too, just because they're a team that interests me.
Yeah.
And I really like Showmaker, and I was curious to see how Lucid would do in his rookie season. I do think this really, really pointed out like how poorly sometimes he recognizes when he can help out his lanes or when he should and when he shouldn't. I also don't know if this is a team thing, but I know they definitely pointed out on cast where like he would fall behind significantly in the mid game, in like early to mid behind his opponents and the opposing jungler, which I don't know if that's a team thing, him not being able to recognize like when he can farm and when he should help his lanes. A combination of both is probably the answer, because again, he is a rookie. But in comparison to something like FPX and Milkyway, one thing that I think FPX know is that Milkyway is their ticket to a win. And they will do like and obviously like I think Lucid learning how to like play more for his lanes, etc. That's gonna serve him really well. It's gonna make sure that he is like a more well-rounded jungler going forward. But when we talk about how like rookies end up performing super well in what situations, I think a lot of like Milky Way's success is not only that he is like a really, really good player, but also FBX like understand the fucking assignment when it comes to Milky Way. Like they were facilitating his kindred so hard. Like they're like, we got you, bro. Like you are going to carry this game and we trust you to carry this game. So we're going to give you literally everything. And it's such a different way of like treating a rookie as opposed to what's going on with Lucid, right? Where he's like fitting into a team of existing veteran players who are kind of presumably trying to help him learn like the game at a more macro level at the highest competitive level. So I think that's like very, very interesting to compare the two.
My favorite part was like CDZ is just taking 2 full turrets top, and it's like, it's cool.
We don't care.
Just farm. Just farm Milky Way. Whatever. Like, get your stacks. It's fine. But yeah, in honor of the Lucid Milky Way topic, I present to you which moment is better plot armor, okay?
Oh yeah, this was sorry, I thought we were getting a Milky Way clip first. No, this is it. Yeah, they also so KT have the setup. Kingan is looking for that sweet flank.
Piosik just uses ult randomly.
Yep. Don't worry about it. There we go. There it is. There's KT losing. Oh, so sad.
Kane was like kind of him this series, I'm not gonna lie. Second plot armor clip.
God, this fight. Here we go. I was rewatching this with LCS casters, and they're just like, oh my god. He's so good. He's so good. Yep, here he comes. Rip. Ugh.
Nice. All right.
Beautiful.
So that was not too sophisticated, but those were just like the plot armor moments of the week, you know. These teams are destined to win their video games. They cannot be stopped.
What is the like what qualifies as bigger plot armor? Does it like shield you from criticism? Because I feel like Milkyway is definitely and again, not that not that I have like a fuck ton to criticize him on, but like I think one thing that's definitely keeping Milkyway up in like the public consciousness is the fact that like in a good way, like I said, FPX really understand the assignment of like how their team works, right? So they are like, we got you, bro. Like you are a carry. We trust you to carry. It's going to be great. And they really, really facilitate that in a good way because they recognize like this is how we win games. Whereas like Lucid had a stinker of a series until that one engage. So like I'm wondering like what you qualify as plot armor.
So for me the plot armor is more you know, like there's no other explanation for this to work out the way it did other than they must be destined to win. They must be destined for victory. There's no other way that it would work out that way. So yeah, those were like for me the plot armor moments of both of those series this week. So yeah, which was the bigger plot armor moment for you?
I think it's then Lucid's, right? Because like I feel like FPX Weibo, I'm looking at it and I'm like, they had a clear game plan. They executed on it. Was it perfect? No, but like they understood Milkyway played really well consistently throughout. Whereas like Lucid, again, had a really, really rough series and still managed to win off that engage. So bigger plot armor.
The stars aligned and he became MVP. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, I maintain that it's impossible for FPX to lose games because we have been playing League of Legends for 14 years or 15 years, somewhere in that ballpark. And we've just been waiting for Milkyway to come of age and be old enough to play competitive games. And now it is impossible for him to lose. Excuse me. It's impossible for him to lose. He is the main character. He is destined for greatness. The greatest plot armor player of all time, because you watch those games and it is legit the greatest Breaking Bad, he can't keep getting away with it moment, and it's absolutely spectacular. Anyone who isn't watching FPX, highly recommend. Pretty much all of their games end that way, where it's like the most absurd, stupid flanks from Care. I can't believe Care didn't get MVP for that game, to be honest. Like Care actually had really good flanks in general. I don't know. It's again, it's just like the Milky Way plot armor. He's too good. But you have to know when they're running out of base, he was screaming, "Go, go, 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 go!" You know, just like that. Just he was booking it. So, yeah, it's definitely enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, it's really fun. I've seen more people watching FPX games now, I think, because of the like obviously co-streamers like you, like Dom, I assume K-Droll as well, are all like, Milkyway is him. So I've seen a lot more people now talking about Milkyway. And then the other day, people were asking me about him, so we put on the FPX Weibo series before, because for people that don't know, we came in early, pre-recorded our like waiting room, like pregame segment, and then there's like a delay where I was, making people watch LPL games.
All right. One question from chat, and then we'll do our final topic. Question is, do you think the problem with DK KT, particular KT, was that they were too passive and low tempo, or too coin flip and roller coaster? Apparently, shewasabulldozer, Twitch username, has heard like both takes. I guess they're somewhat conflicting takes. So, what's your opinion?
I think too passive can only be applied. It's weird because I feel like both can be applied. Like if you look at, for example, the first game, which I actually think was the longest, I think that was like the 54-minute game.
Mm-hmm.
And then game 3 was the 51-minute game. Let me just double check. Yeah. So like in that first game in particular, you can see like Pioshik recognizes that like he really wants to come and wrap around behind the like pushing Lucian Nami lane and like really try to set up his bot lane so they're not, getting absolutely rolled, and he kind of knows that Perfect is going to be able to push in on top side of the Rumble, which he was like kind of perma pushing King in for the early part. So I think you saw Pioshik be able to recognize like, oh, I need to be here. I need to be doing things here. And there was like a string of those where it just did not work out, where he looked for ganks, I think like 3 or 4 times in a row on bot side. And it didn't work because like Lucid was unexpectedly there because he had pathed down, etc. So I think in terms of early game, KT is at their best when Pioshik is really involved with his lanes. And I think you've seen that in a lot of their wins. But I wouldn't say that he was like particularly more passive in this, where I think passivity becomes a problem. And I don't think this is a DK KT thing. I think it's an all game thing because, like, again, we had a lot of long games in LCS. And I remember talking to XU specifically, and like obviously people are probably going to be eye rolling and be like, well, there's a big difference between XU and like a LCK jungler or an LCK player. But like ultimately, I think he said something that is very prescient and can apply to all regions, where when you get to that point in game, you can be kind of afraid to in really long games make like individual mistakes because you're well aware that it can end the game, right? Yep. And so that's why you see if teams are not particularly good at recognizing like when they can go in or when they can close, you see a lot of times where they're like kind of dancing around each other waiting for the next objective to come up because it gives them an excuse to fight. In game 3, that excuse was Elder Drake, right? Where like KT had set up, they took mid and Hib. They actually, this is where they end up, DK still ends up, even though they win that fight, losing the Nexus turrets, 2 Nexus turrets off of it. Because they're all grouped around to fight. King is trying to find his flangle over there. And after Pioshik does use the Maokai ult, Lucid finds an angle where he recognizes he can just go in and take that. And I feel like players become increasingly more hesitant to go for those plays the longer a game goes on, just naturally, because you do recognize like how much damage both teams do and the fact that it's probably going to be a wipe, especially if it's a 5v5, right? So I don't know what people were saying was like passive versus aggressive. Sure. But I do think we saw, because I don't know the conversation that was happening, but I do think we saw some of that in this series from both teams, especially in games 1 and 3, because of the nature of the
Right.
fact that they're just really long games.
Makes sense.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it does or not. We'll see if they seem very upset about the answer or not. But I think we will, since this has gone on for quite a bit. I do.
Yeah, wow. Our
to
episodes are
go.
just getting longer and longer.
Yeah,
I also have to
just
go.
more and more rambling. So we'll save like the final bonus topic for next time, since it's not even related to League of Legends anyway. But thanks everyone for watching as always, and just so you know, for YouTube viewers, we do have monetization reactivated on YouTube. I didn't have it because I hadn't used my YouTube channel that much for many years, but it is now reactivated. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, and like watch the ads. It definitely helps. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you next week.